Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to continue looking at the updates to the phrase tracker spreadsheet. If you didn't see the last video, it was apparent it was going to become too long, so I have to break it up into two parts. You don't necessarily have to watch the last video, but I would encourage you to do so. Um, Let me just break it down like this. I organized this in such a way that we're able to see from 2017 until now, go year by year and look in that year which words or phrases were mentioned the most out of the last 5 years. Okay, back to 2017, or sorry, 6 years. Okay, so we started with looking at words and phrases that haven't been said for a very long time. That was kind of like its own little section. And then we looked at 2017. I decided to include that because it was a special year in a lot of different ways. And then we did 2018, the first year of President Nelson's presidency. Okay. And then just a quick reminder what this is, it's a tally of all the talks that include these words and phrases. So, I bless you has been said once, and it was this year. And since there's only been one general conference, it was during the April 2023 general conference. I came up with these numbers by using the Scripture Citation Index, which is this website. You can do the same thing. Just go down here to search, and then unclick these, just have general conference, and then search whatever your word you want to look for, or phrase like second coming. Type that. It'll bring up all general conference talks all the way back to 1942 that include whatever it is that you search. Okay, so we're going to move on and see where 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, which words and phrases came in first in those particular years. Before we do that, really quick, here's the Flood the Earth Challenge. I haven't updated it since the last video, so it's exactly the same. 5,716 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared so far, 556 people that have been part of this challenge. So please join. Let's try and get this up to over 1,000. Do it. Do your part. You don't have to report to me. Just do it anyway. But if you're so inclined, please report because that way it encourages other people to do the same. Okay, so back to this. So you might remember the last one that we looked at was Covenant Path. And that's definitely been talked about quite a bit recently within the last few years. Okay, starting with 2019. So we got Day of Desolation, and that's only come up twice in General Conference, and one of those years was 2019. Here, I should probably zoom in one more time. Okay, let's go to the next one. Running Out, as in time is running out. This has only ever been said 2 times in General Conference since 1942. One time was by Henry B. Eyring. He was talking about temples, and essentially the context was so many temples were being constructed during the time of President Hinckley, and he was kind of like thinking out loud in his talk. He wondered if maybe time might be running out for us to do the work that we need to do for the dead, right? And then this one, 2019, this is the only other time that this phrase has been used, and it was by President Nelson himself, and he said that time is running out for people that have distanced themselves from the church or not really sought to gain their own testimony of the restored church and Jesus Christ and his gospel. Okay, time is running out. You need to watch his body language as he says that. The name of the talk is Come Follow Me. Go watch it. I would encourage you to go watch it. So this is another way that we can know when a prophet tells us that time is running out. Time is probably running out. And that's in reference to the second coming. That is in reference to the second coming. And that was 4 years ago, 2019. Okay? And then, like I said in the last video, you have people that think that, the second coming is probably 100 years away, 200 years away, whatever number, whatever ridiculous number, 50 years away, 40, 30 years away. I don't think President Nelson would say that time was running out if you still had 30 more years, 40 more years plus. That's just me. Okay, let's go on to the next one. New Jerusalem, said in both 2019 and 2020. Going back in time, you see this doesn't really come up very much. It did quite a bit during the 70s, and that's usually the case. 60s as well, and then a little bit, also some more in the 50s and 40s. But since that spike in the 70s, really, it never really came up very much at all. And now you have another a little spike right here, 2 years in a row. So I think that's interesting. Okay, next, building up of Zion, which matches what New Jerusalem, 2019 and 2020. Go back in time, and it kind of parallels New Jerusalem somewhat, but there you go. I'm going to skip that one. Please do it. 2019 and 2021, 2005, and those are the only times. So the only times that please do it comes up is 2005 and then 2019, 2021. I think that is interesting. Please continue. 2019, 2022, 2007, 2000, and then 1946. So almost just like please do it. But do you get the sense here? Let's just review what we've seen so far for 2019. Day of Desolation, time is running out, New Jerusalem, building up of Zion, please do it, please continue. However you interpret that, let it be so. Okay, next one, today is the day. Similar to please continue and please do it. Go back in time, there's a few, and a little bit more. So it kind of follows, well, it doesn't really follow a pattern, but again, 2 within the last 4 years. God is with us. I'm going to move on. Muslim. I wanted to see this because as we approach the millennium, there's going to be, I think, a shift in focus. So far, we haven't really been able to reach out so much to the Muslims unless they have immigrated to another country where you can preach the gospel and they can receive it. Even then, missionaries, or at least on my mission in Spain, we had to be careful. There were certain rules that we had to follow because you could put them in danger and you don't want to do that. But I've done a couple of videos on this channel where we've noticed that the church is it seems like they're really trying to reach out to the Islamic world, to Muslim countries, Arab countries. I just go look it up on my channel. In fact, there's a new interfaith section of the church website, and so far all it is between our church and Islam. There's a pamphlet that was put out. It was Elder Gong and Elder Bednar. They both kind of launched that at BYU. And why? Well, because I think Muslims are going to become more and more relevant, especially once we cross over into the millennium. Because at that point, Christ is going to be king, and I would imagine there'd be no off limits anywhere as to where you could share the gospel, unlike it is now. So anyway, I discussed that in greater depth in other videos. Okay, the next one, attacks of the adversary. Well, there's kind of a spike right here in the last few years. Go back in time, you don't really see it at all, just a couple times. So a spike in attacks of the adversary. The work is done. Okay, so that's been mentioned every year so far since 2018, with the exception of this year. We'll have to wait until October to see if that comes up again. But let's see what it looked like back in time. Just a bunch of ones. There's a couple twos, some more twos in the 80s. And then it kind of dies down before the 80s. So this is one of the 2 times that you see a spike in the work is done. It's during President Nelson's time. And I'm thinking it's because the work is almost done, meaning the work before the second coming that's required of us to do. Wipe away all tears. This is a millennial term. This is something that occurs during the millennium. All tears are wiped away. And look at this. Pretty hot and heavy since 2015. Go back in time. twice in 2010, 1996, just a few here, a few there. Very sparse, very sparse. And then all of a sudden, last few years, boom, wipe away all tears. Why? I would assume it's because we're almost to that point. We're almost to the millennium. Please no. Okay, we have a solid block from 2014 until present, including this year. So that's pretty neat. The spike, of course, was in 2019. That's what we're looking at right now. Go back in time. Okay, you see some. There's 6 in 2002, 4 and 4, 1996, 1995, and then it just completely dies off before 1979. So please no, not so much in years past, like a long time ago. But as we get closer and closer to the second coming, no, really, please no. Please no. I mean, look how you can do this with all these different terms, you guys. You know, it's not like we're looking at just one thing. We're looking at example after example after example, different concepts, all related to the second coming. And time and time and time again, you always see the same pattern. There's usually almost all the time with all these a clustering, a spike in frequency within the last few years, primarily during President Nelson's presidency, and then usually the only other time is around the 70s. That's it. There is a story there. It's not coincidence. We should sit up and take note. Distraction. Okay, so since 2015, that's been a big topic. Here's another block from 2006 to 2011. Go back in time and not so much. Not so much. Why? Well, because now we have electronics and all sorts of entertainment. We have smartphones. There's a lot of distractions right now. Okay, please remember. Let's take a look at this. So, not a whole lot before, I would say maybe before 2005, but be a little bit more conservative before 2010. From 2010 all the way to 2019, please remember, please remember, please remember, please remember. And then a little bit of a break. And then in 2022, it comes back to life with 4, please remember. And then nothing so far this year. Okay, in coming days, look at this. All this is during President Nelson's time. Not anything so far this year, but okay, let's go back in time. And there's nothing at all. Nothing at all. So why is it, if the second coming is so far away, why is it that all of a sudden, in coming days, not weeks or months or years or centuries, in coming days, that term has been exclusively used during President Nelson's presidency. In coming days. And then here's coming days. I can't remember why I did coming days as well, but by doing coming days, we add 2 more. 1 in 2020, 1 in 2021. Let's go back in time. Okay, there's a few in the 2000s, couple in the mid-90s, and that's it. So extremely, very similar to incoming days. Still the same story. Okay, next, survive spiritually. That starts off during President Nelson's time in 2018. Remember, he became president at the very beginning of the year. It was the early part of January that he became president of the church. So, okay. And then going back in time, you see it a couple times, 111, that just like hardly at all, really. And then all of a sudden, survive spiritually during President Nelson's time. Deception. Let's see. You see that quite a bit, but it kind of gradually becomes more intense as you get closer to the present, with spiking probably from like the most intense period of deception from 2015 until now. Although interestingly, it hasn't been said yet this year. Salt Lake Temple, a ton of Salt Lake Temple talk in 2019, 2020. Go back in time, a ton, 1999 and 2000. So it'd be kind of similar, um, a little bit. Definite spike. Of course, that's because of the Salt Lake Temple renovation. A lot of us figure that that has something to do, probably for the second coming, preparations for the second coming. Although we've also discussed the possibility that maybe if he wants to catch tears off guard, if he wants to see who is really ready, he might come before it's completed. But all we can do is just wait and see. Um, there was a time, man, I don't think did I note this down? Let me see. Let me go to my spreadsheet called Prophets, President Nelson's talks. No. There was a video that I did, I'm pretty sure at least, where President Nelson had mentioned the Salt Lake Temple every single conference, but that's changed recently. So, okay. Well, anyway, there's just a thought for you. Make and keep covenants. Oh, geez. That doesn't really start until like 1990, but then you just have ones and threes. But then it really, really takes off, maybe starting in 2007 and then going till present. And already this year, we have 4 times that it's been said, which ties with 2020, all of 2020. So it must be really important to be on the covenant path, like we reviewed in the last video, and to make and keep covenants. It seems like that's pretty key, as there's all this talk about the second coming. Okay, distractions. Yeah, this one just kind of dies off the further back you go for the most part, but it really takes off starting in 2009 until present, with a spike in 2019 with 10 times. Okay, of the veil. Usually this is in reference of gathering scattered Israel on both sides of the veil, or doing the work of salvation on both sides of the veil, things like that. So obviously there's a big dark red block from 2019 to 2021. This year, or so far this year, it's only been said twice. Let's go back in time. Pinks, whites, ones, yeah. Which is just, it's kind of weird to me, because I would have thought that of the veil would show up a lot more, just kind of like steady. But no, that really starts kind of back in 1990, and then it really takes off starting with President Nelson. Judaism. So just like Muslims, we know that from what we've studied, the gospel is primarily going to go to the Jews during the millennium. It is right now. It has been ever since the beginning of this dispensation. It's not like missionaries, before they go to a house, ask if there's Jewish people there. The gospel's gone to Jews. Jews have been converted, but as far as it going to the Jews in mass, that's not going to be until the millennium, based on what we've studied. Go check out those videos. But Judaism in 2020, once. Going back in time, 84, 85, 77, 66, 64. Okay, so there's that, but it did come up in 2020, which is interesting. Apostolic blessing, once in 2020, 2016, 1995, and that's it. Those are the only 3 times that phrase has been used, and 2 of those times have been within the last 10 years. Fall upon their necks. This is, of course, in reference to the city of Enoch. When the city of Enoch comes back, supposedly we're going to be falling upon their necks and them on ours. Like I've said before, I don't plan on doing that, but I will shake hands. But that has not been brought up at all. The only time in 2020, this was during the Sisters in Zion talk by President Eyring. It's the one where he said, "You women, your daughters and your granddaughters will be at the heart of building this society that will meet with Enoch and greet the Savior when he comes, creating the Zion society. I know a lot of people got discouraged this last conference because he said something similar that made it seem like that the second coming is not for another generation or two. But I think it was more in line with what he said with the Sisters of Zion. He's talking to the current grandmas and great grandmas, their daughters, and then their daughters are the ones. Um, so you have to remember he's more on the elderly side, and this church isn't just middle-aged people or young adults, it's all generations. So that's how I view it. But anyway, the only time that comes up is in 2020, and this is one of the key events of the second coming. Winding up scenes. 2020. Oh yeah, by the way, so now we're done with 2019. Now we're looking at 2020. So winding up scenes. 2020, 2015, 2000, 1997, 93, a few times right there. And then kind of a lot in the 70s, relatively speaking, some in the 60s, and that's it. So the typical spiking, and then it comes back to life. There hasn't been like a big spike, but there was one, and of course it was during 2020. Watch ye therefore, 2020, 75, 66, and that's it. Watch ye therefore. I'm pretty sure that's from Matthew 24, to watch for the signs of the times. Flooded. It's just kind of like the highest frequency time for that is from 2004 to 2011, but it does come up a couple times over the last couple years. Arab, again, 2 times, 2020, 2022. Before that, 72, 66, and then actually a bunch more. So nothing really to see there too much. Vested in me, 22 and 20. Oh, 94, and that's it. That kind of goes hand in hand with apostolic blessing, sort of. It's like, you know, I'm going to give you a blessing with the authority and power vested in me. Okay, against the church. This is an interesting one. Go back in time. Oh wait, no. I was thinking of something else. Never mind. Not that interesting. Not really a whole lot there. Okay, bridegroom. Nothing too significant there, I wouldn't say. Time to be alive, 2020, 2014, 2009. And then at the turn of the millennium, from 1997 to 2000, there's a big spike. And then absolutely nothing before that. There was a lot of excitement around this time, the year 2000. And I've seen that time and time again. This is kind of like another spiking period, less so than the 70s or the last 5 years, but this is kind of like a minor one. There was excitement at that time. Let's see, ongoing revelation, 2021 and 2022, or sorry, 2020 and 2021, and not a whole lot at any other time. So that's been a concept. Final phase, that's been said once every year for 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022. And before that, you don't see it at all. Now, isn't that interesting? Final phase. Final phase, that's only been said during President Nelson's time. Final phase. Final phase. 10 virgins, that's been said every year since 2020. 2 times last year. It's brought up time and again. There's kind of like another spiking, centered on the 70s, kind of quiets down, and then it's picked back up within recent years. Wonderful time. Okay, from 1942 all the way to 1991, it is not a wonderful time. But then in 1992, there's 2 times, and then again during the last few years before, from 1997 to 2000, wonderful time. That goes right along with time to be alive. So there's excitement there, and then wonderful time in 2020. Saw our day. Not much there. There's not really anything that stands out too much. Great Tribulations. Yeah, nothing really stands out with that one. Joe Smith is a prophet. Let's move on. Out of Great Tribulation. Out of Great Tribulation, that spikes from 2016 to 2021. Withheld. That kind of comes to life starting in 1993. Sort of activism. So this one has only ever been said in 1971, and then the other 3 times in 2020, and then this year, activism. Because that's a growing problem socially. Okay, his return. So every year, including this year since 2019, and then once in 2017, go back in time, and it's pretty sporadic. Yep, it's sporadic, and then all of a sudden, a solid block from 2019 until now. Another indicator that we are in that time. His return, and this is in reference to the second coming. Constitution, you can see a spike right here from 2020 until now. Go back in time. Around the millennium, the turn of the millennium, late 80s. Okay, so this one not so much, but wow, look at the 60s. This one is primarily peaking around the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, and then it actually kind of dies off as time goes by. Restoration of all things, City of Holiness. Let's look at that. So 2 times in 2020, 2008, 91. All right, so nothing really there, but it's interesting that it gets mentioned again. The City of Holiness, that's in reference to the City of Enoch. Zion people. Let's see. Yeah, there's a cluster kind of in the 80s, and then 2017 to 2020. Restitution of all things. It doesn't really stand out too much. Continuing restoration. Okay, continuing restoration, that's only ever said in 2020 3 times, and then once in 2022. So you have restoration of all things, continuing restoration. Wasn't there one other one back here? No. I don't know. Okay, let's continue. Great and Dreadful, as in Great and Dreadful Day of the Lord. You can see a cluster starting in 2019 right there. Big cluster. Again, centered on the 70s from 64 to about 82. Great and Dreadful Day of the Lord. Well, I guess it's been pretty solid, except for it kind of dies off after 82. And then you see it clustering again starting in 2019. Planet, Days Ahead, King of Kings. Let's look at King of Kings. Yeah, there's nothing really there. Prepare Us. Well, Prepare Us, that becomes a solid thing starting in 2008 and going until 2022. Hasn't been said yet this year, but when you go before 2008, that's when you start to see some blank spaces and some years where it hasn't been said. Prepare Us. 1823. His Coming. Wow. 80s and 70s. Holy cow. This one kind of starts with the late 40s and goes until 83. Then it dies off. And then there's kind of a clustering right here. Years since. Nah. Nothing really there. Commotion. With Commotion, it's kind of scattered. There's some white space and stuff as you go back in time, but it becomes a solid thing starting in 2013 until this year. Commotion is a key word when talking about the second coming because it's said in prophecy that there's going to be, the commotion of the last days, essentially. Oh, ongoing restoration. You see a pretty strong cluster right here, 2019 to 2021. Go back in time, and you don't see that at all. So ongoing restoration, and then what was the other one? Where is it? Let's see. Continuing restoration right here. So that's a pretty solid concept right now. Ongoing restoration, continuing restoration. Okay, of one heart. This is a phrase that refers to Zion, how we're supposed to become a Zion people, to greet the Savior when he comes. So big cluster starting in 2019. Go back in time. You kind of see it every now and again, but it doesn't really get too frequent, except for in like 1977 with 4. So this is probably the most heavy cluster or highest frequency since 2019 until present of one heart. And I think that tells you, again, that's like the big focus right now, as we have a prophet who was a heart surgeon. He's currently working on the heart of the church because we're supposed to be of one heart and one mind. We celebrate starting in 2018. You have a big block right here that's been said every single year. Go back in time. It gets lighter. It's a little bit more sporadic, and you don't see it at all before 1966, going down to 1950. So, yeah, this is like there's celebrating going on right now since President Nelson's presidency started. Let's see, Kirtland Temple. Missouri. Anniversary. I'm going to skip that one too. Destruction. Yeah, but geez, look at destruction back in the 70s, 60s, early 50s, and then of course in the 40s as World War II is going on. Ongoing restoration. Yeah, you see the same thing. So ongoing, continuing, all that stuff. Restoration. That's like solidly like a concept that mostly belongs to President Nelson's time. That's like where it's being said the most, and almost like exclusively. Your covenants, you can see a big block here from 2019 until present. Go back in time. It's sporadic, and then there's a lot of space down here. So, okay. Yeah, a big thing. Your covenants, that goes along with covenant path and the other one. I can't remember what the other one was, but all right, last days. Nothing really here. Just big spiking in the 70s and the very early 80s. Enoch, there is a solid block right there from 2020 until current. It's already been said 2 times this year. But look at this, 7 times in 2020. 2020 was a really important year, you guys. Obviously, for so many reasons, not just what was going on in the world, but I think with the church, being 200 years since the first vision, all these different changes and things implemented, the Hosanna shout, 2020 really was a hinge point. These last few years, I think we should be grateful that we've had them, but I don't think that there's very much time left. I really don't. I think 2020 was like the big warning, if there was one, to the not just to the church, but to the whole world. But it's reflected, I think, in the language of General Conference, because you can see it here. So Enoch, go back in time. He's brought up, pretty frequently. In 1973, you have 8 times. That's the only year that beats out 2020. But That's a interesting concept right now. Okay, prepare the world. From 2015 until 2021, there's a solid block. It wasn't said last year, and then once so far this year. Go back in time, and surprisingly, there's a lot of white space. Prepare the world. There's not a lot of prepare the world. Just onesies, twosies, maybe 1-3. But then once you get to 2015, it's just a solid thing. Prepare the world. Prepare for what? For the second coming. And 7 times in 2020. Let's see, Jehovah, Kirtland, we are his. Uh, uh, promise you. Promise you is interesting because it kind of tapers off when you go back in time. And then when you get closer to where we are now, it kind of ramps up a bit. Second coming. Okay, this is one of the more dramatic ones. Look at 2018 until 2021 with the most mention of second coming, the phrase second coming in 2020 itself with 12 times. And it's interesting that it's kind of tapered off how in 2022 only 4 times, although it's also interesting that it's already been said 4 times this year. So it'll be interesting to see what comes this next October. But dark red block right here, second coming. Go back in time. You don't see anything like it except for kind of the late 80s and then sort of the mid 90s. But not like this. Not like 2018 to 2021. That's unprecedented. Hasn't happened before. For second coming. Global. This is a big kind of buzz term, not just in the church, but in the world. But I think it's still interesting to note. And the 2 big years for that, 2020 and 2021, probably talking about the pandemic mostly. Maybe that's why. But when you go back in time, you don't hardly see it at all. It's very sparse. The church is getting bigger. That's like going to be another part of it. Okay, hear him. Pretty solid and a pretty good clustering from 2019 until present. Go back in time. There's a spike in the 70s and the 60s, as you might expect, but there you go. Hear him. Okay, now we're moving on. So that's it for 2020. Now we're moving on to 2021. You have this phrase right here. Go down. That's one that kind of dies off over time. Like you see it more in the past than you do nowadays. May God be with you till we meet again. You actually don't see that at all, except for once during President Monson's time in 2012, and it was him that said it, President Monson, and then twice during President Nelson's time. And the last time he said it, it really shocked a lot of us, or at least a lot of you commenters. It shocked me because he said it tearfully. And there's been people that have explained it away, like, oh, he's just very emotional. And that is what Elder Suarez said, is just that he has a big heart. But I still have to wonder, we've discussed the possibility that with the Book of Mormon kind of being a foreshadowing of the second coming, right? When Christ came the first time in the Book of Mormon, the way that the account goes, it kind of foreshadows how things are going to be for the second coming. And part of that was that they received a 5-year warning. Now, they weren't told the exact day. That's actually a very important concept. They weren't given the exact day, but they knew that generally it'd be 5 years later. And so, in the Christmas devotional this last year, Christmas devotional 2022, Elder Anderson brought that up. How why wasn't it that they weren't told until the Why didn't Nephi find out until the day before he was born? Um, why weren't other people told? Again, because it's a test. We're here to be tested, and it would skew. It would mess up the test if we all knew exactly when he was going to come. But going back to this, may God be with you till we meet again. I find it interesting that it was said 2 times, because what if President Nelson has been told, I'm going to come in X number of years, or I'm going to come sometime between 2020 and 2024 or 2023 or something like that. We've discussed the possibility with the way that last year's general conferences went, with all the different things that we discussed. We felt like, or at least I did, and some of you did too, that those could have been the last general conferences before the second coming. Some people scoff at that, and that's fine as long as you're nice about it. But that could explain this kind of language. Like if he isn't certain, he's like, well, I'm going to say God be with you till, or may God be with you till we meet again, because this may be the last time that we see some people, um, as we go into the millennium, because there are people in the church that are tares, and we love them. But again, if you're living a telestial life, if you're living a telestial law right now, you will not be moving on into the millennium. And that's sad. Everybody's sad. Um, anyway, so that's something to think about. Now, it wasn't said this last conference, so I don't know. Maybe he is just tenderhearted and he was just feeling it, but I think that the other possibility is a very real possibility too. God is among us. Twice in 2021, once in 1996, 85, and that's it. So God is among us is a very rare phrase, and it was said twice in 2021. Interesting. You know, um, could this be in a literal way? No, like really, he is among us, as in the first portions or the first sessions of Adam on Diamond have already commenced, or some other thing has already commenced. Don't know. Let's see, crown of glory, power of God in great glory. You see a solid block starting in 2018 and then all the way till present. Go back in time and it just kind of tapers off. That's a big concept right now. The power of God in great glory. They've been talking about that a lot, in the sense that we need that power and that protection, um, in the influence of God and the Spirit in our lives. Okay, please make 2 times in 2022, 2 times in 2021. Go back in time, and you don't see it that much at all. There's a little spike in 1978, and that's pretty much it. So the biggest or the highest frequency time for please make is 2021 and 2022. Please make. Just like please please and please note and hear him and just all these different things. Samuel the Lamanite, we were just talking about you. He's brought up 3 times in 2021. Go back in time. Every now and again, but the most times he's mentioned in any given year is 2021. So, and especially there's kind of like a lot of talk about him between 2012 and 2021. If you go before that, only, a couple times. And then there's kind of like a clustering right here in the 80s. Another little cluster in the early 70s, and then the early 60s, and then 49 and 50. But so Samuel the Lamanite has seen a few different clusterings or spikes, and the biggest of which I would say started in 2012 until 2021. I feel like that could be a hint. Unparalleled. Look at this. You see a clustering between 2015 to 2021. Go back in time. Not so much. Except for the early 40s, kind of. So right now, 2015 to 2021, unparalleled time. Let's see, your foundation. Yeah, your foundation, it dies off. And it only really, there's like a spike in the early 90s, then it dies off, and then it comes back to life pretty much from 2001 until 2022 with just a couple years missing. All right, next one, spiritual foundation, solid block from 2017 to 2022. A big spike in 2004 and 2005. And then before that, not a whole lot. So early to or mid 2000s, and then 2008 to 2013, there's kind of a clustering there, and then a solid block from 2017 to 2022. Spiritual preparation. Okay, look at millennium. 2020 until present. Go back in time. Nothing, except for around the turn of the millennium, the year 2000. And then before that, it dies off. There's a cluster in the late 70s, early 80s. Another one in the 70s, 60s. Yeah. But basically from the early 80s. Okay, so those are the three ones, okay? Mostly 60s, 70s, early 80s. Then a big one centered on the year 2000. And then it completely dies off. It completely dies off from 2005 to 2019. And then all of a sudden, boom, 2020 until today. I feel like that says something. Let's see, great glory. There's a cluster in the 60s, the 70s, kind of dies off after that. And then you have a big cluster pretty much from maybe from, well, I don't know, 2009 until current with a couple years missing. Comes again. Okay, that's a term that before 2008, you don't see a lot of it except for in the 70s. And then before the 70s, it just dies off. So there you go, 70s. And then it really gets kind of heavy starting in 2016 until present. Let's see, 4 times. In fact, the most times that comes again is said in any given year is 2021. All right, never been more important, imperative, needed, etc., etc. What do you think about the last few years? Looking at the colors here, I think we're in a time that's never been more important, imperative, needed. Da 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 da. Go back in time, you see it, but it's kind of scattered and sparse and not a whole lot. And then all of a sudden, things get really serious starting in 2019. Let's see, Christ lives. Christ lives, that kind of follows the same pattern. You see a spike kind of like in the late 60s and then the 70s. Then it kind of dies down. Then toward the millennium, mostly from 2000 to 2005, maybe 2007, there's another spike. Well, I don't know. I guess you could say, maybe if I was to describe this one, it's nearly non-existent in the 40s and 50s. Then it kind of like slowly ramps up and it just gets more and more and more as time goes by, with a big spike in 2021. All right, that he lives. I don't know. That one, not so much. It kind of follows the same thing as Christ lives, but it doesn't stick out as much. Temple recommend. Yeah. So from 1942 until 1970, it only comes up 2 times. And then you start to see some 1s and 2s. And then in 86, you see a 3. And then it gets a little bit more serious in 94. But the most serious that it's been, the highest that it's been, is the year 2021 with 6. So there's been a lot of focus, maybe since like 2014 to 2022, for temple recommends. And that goes along with, the covenant path, living inside your covenants, being oh, here's the next one, covenant people. And surprise, surprise, uh, it kind of looks like the temple recommend column. Let's go back in time. Yeah, it's basically the same. They're very similar as far as like when they start to spike and when they start to die off. It's very similar. Covenant people. Okay, you're spiritual. Yeah, dies off as you go back in time, and then a big solid block from 2012 until current. Jerusalem. Okay. This one, okay, not really so much. Nothing really to comment on there. Okay, contention. 9 times in 2021. It's a dark red. Go back in time. You don't see any other dark reds except for 1971 with 7, but it's not as dark as 9. So roughly speaking, again, there's kind of like a spike in the 70s. There's kind of one in the 90s. But especially from 2016 until now, there's been a lot of talking about contention. Let God prevail. That's, I think in the church, that's a term that's been coined by President Nelson, because I don't think it's been said before. Not that I've heard, and it has not been said in General Conference before the year 2020. So the year 2020 is the first time that we hear it, and it's just once, and then we hear it a ton in 2021 and 2020, and then just once so far this year. Royalty. We have 2022 and 2023. 2007, you have a spike kind of around the millennium. Another little cluster in the early 80s. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's anything really to that, but make that what you will. Marriage feast, one time in 2022, 2004, 81, 59, 56, 51. So it doesn't come up very often at all. Last time we heard it, 2022, with Elder Bednar's talk about the marriage feast. I'm going to skip that one. Leads his church. Yeah, this is interesting. Leads his church. Can you believe that that has not been said until the first year it was said? And the first year it was said is 1973, and then after that you have to wait all the way till 1994, and then it kind of like, you hear it like about every other year, something like that. But then it's pretty solid from 2015 to 2022, with a spike in 2022. Oh yeah, and by the way, now we're looking at 2022. So that's interesting. If they're saying leads his church more often, then it may be that he's exerting more influence, calling more shots. Maybe he's meeting more with the apostles and the prophet. But for some reason, they're saying leads his church more than they did in the past. Let's see. Please consider. Yep, this is one that you hardly see it in the past, just a couple times here and there. And then there's kind of like a little cluster from 2008 to 2011, but from 2014 until present, it's pretty solid. Please consider. This goes along with I invite you, or I can't remember the other ones, but ones like that. Please, please note. All right, now is the time. Go back. And you do see it somewhat frequently, but it never really gets above 3. They're mostly 1s. But things get really serious starting in probably 1998. That's when you see a 3. And then from that time, it's a lot more frequent than before that. So I'm guessing that now is the time. And that's something that President Nelson said like, I can't remember how many times. I think it was like 5 times in his talk. It was his main talk about being a. I think the talk was called "Peacemakers Wanted or Needed," and he was saying now is the time to stop having people walk on eggshells around you. Now is the time to da 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 da. Okay, okay, religious freedom. That's been a big deal recently. You see it sometimes in the past, but a lot more since 2013 until present, with the spike in 2022 with 4 times. Please do not do. Yep, same thing. Just like the other things, please consider, please note. It kind of, there's not a whole lot of that in the past, and then it gets a lot more frequent. In this case, from 2011 until present. In fact, we heard it this year. Okay, eyes to see. This is interesting. Solid from 2017 until present, with a spike last year. Eyes to see. That means there's people that cannot see the signs. And those people, I think, tend to be people that think that the second coming is 200 years away, 100 years away, stuff like that. People that want to keep pushing it in the future, keep explaining away signs and what the prophet and the apostles and general authorities themselves are saying. They want to minimize that. And I know that sounds harsh, but I think if you have the eyes to see, you realize the time that we're in. Go back in the past, there's not a whole lot of talk about eyes to see. I mean, it comes up somewhat frequently, not really. There's a lot of white space, but it's solid. It's solid from 2017 to 2023. And this one deserves a special mention. Let me pull up Second Coming, Elder Christoffel Golden. This was a great talk. Let's see, this was during the October 2021 General Conference, preparing for the second coming of Christ. And he said something really interesting here. Zoom in. He says, "For those who have eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts to feel, more than ever before, we are required to confront the reality that we're getting ever closer to the second coming of Jesus Christ. True, great difficulties yet await those on the earth at his return, but in this regard, the faithful need not fear." The faithful need not fear. All you fear people out there. So it doesn't sound like he's talking about the second coming being 200 years away or 100 years away. Okay, let's go to the next one. Flood. Now, there is Flood the Earth, for example, from Elder Ronald A. Rasband's talk, where he pointed out the Gospel Library app and how now there's a button there where you can share the Book of Mormon app with people that aren't members of our church. But the other flooding, I'd have to look and see the context. I'm not sure, but with a lot of these, I didn't necessarily check the context, so that has to be taken into account. But still, it's interesting to note 4 times already this year, and then 4 times last year. Why does that matter? Because you know that Noah and his flood is a parallel event to what's going to happen at the second coming. When Noah entered the ark and the earth was flooded, the earth was baptized. That's doctrine. For some reason, the earth gets baptized. And likewise, it's going to receive the Holy Ghost by the baptism of fire. The earth is literally going to be burnt in some kind of way. And the earth will receive the Holy Ghost. And so saying flood, I think, is akin to, what happened during Noah's time and what's going to happen, and like alluding to what's about to happen, the baptism of fire. But anyway, going back in time, I don't know. It's actually said quite a bit. It is said quite a bit, but there was a little bit of a quiet time from 2012 until 2021, and then all of a sudden 2 years in a row of 4. So I don't know. Okay, spiritual foundation with a spike, or it's centered on 2022 the 5 times. Go back in time, just a whole lot of white space. There's just ones every here and there. There's a couple twos. But yeah, spiritual foundation, there's a big emphasis of that on that right now. Okay, 2022. Plead with you 8 times. 8 times in 2022. Go back in time, and all you see is kind of the lighter pink colors. There's a couple 4s, but the most pleading is done between 2008 until now with a spike. In fact, I think the most is in 2022. So there was a lot of pleading being done in 2022. And President Nelson also said, God be with you until we meet again. I mean, the year in which you hear the most pleading, plead with you, might be an indication, it might, that things are going to get serious really quick. Please change right now. Please stop doing this. Please take note. You know, I plead with you. It's like there's like a sense of urgency behind that. Okay, your testimony, it's the same. 8 times, 2022. Go back in time, and it just kind of, just like plead with you, it just kind of uh, tapers off. There's not a whole lot. Okay, next one. King Benjamin, 14 times last year. 14. Go back in time. There was 16 in 1990, but that's the only time that comes close. That's interesting. And we noted that before, so I'm not going to elaborate on that really. He is risen. Not really a whole lot there, although there is kind of a somewhat notable cluster from 2021 until now. And I'm actually kind of confused why it wasn't said at all from 2018 to 2020. So basically, uh, up to right now, the halfway mark of his presidency, half of that time, he has risen was not said, and then the second half, it was said. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. But whatever the case, there's been a slight spike right there. Oh, and that begins 2023. So we're on the last ones here. Okay. He's risen, overcome the world. Already 6 times this year. Already 6 times. Let's go back in time and see if there are any other 6s. Nope, there's not. And it just kind of slowly tapers off. So overcome the world. There's a lot of that starting in 2017 until present. And in this last general conference alone, overcome the world 6 times. I think that kind of goes along with plead with you 8 times and your testimony 8 times. It seems that now more than ever is a time that you need to be convinced and persuaded to be good and have a spiritual foundation and live within your covenants and so on and so forth. Palm Sunday, this is the last one. Shouldn't be surprised, but let me just show you this. 9 times in 2023, 3 times in 2020, because that general conference, the April general conference was during Palm Sunday, the Sunday sessions. Once in 2019, once in 2017, couple times, 2009, 2008, 1993, 82, 55, and that's it. So it's just funny to see a phrase that's like hardly ever used, and then all of a sudden, boom, just like 1 year, it goes straight into the dark red. Okay, well, that's gonna pretty much be it. So what's interesting when we look at the overall picture is as we're looking at the years where there's like the spike, 2020, let me go to 2020. Okay, look at this row right here, this line. Okay, this is the year 2020. 2020 compared to the other years is the longest as far as the phrases that are used in them spiking in the year 2020. Between 2017 and 2023, you get what I'm saying? I still think that there's probably some people that are confused about that. Just pay attention to the line. Just look at the colors. 2020 has the longest line. It has the longest line. 2020 was clearly a very, very, very important year. Okay. That's all I got to say about that. I think there's more to it than what we currently know. We do know the significant things that happened that year and what it was commemorating, but I think there is probably more. I think there's probably more. So anyway, there's also 2021 is also pretty long, starting right here, but it's not as long. It's not even close to as long as 2020 is. 2019 is pretty long. Yeah, but the longest one I would say is 2020. Just meaning that out of all these really key terms, there was a lot of second coming talk during the year 2020, and there was a lot of it. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. Okay. Hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit monotonous. I would encourage you to actually come on this spreadsheet yourself, just like these two people. There's two people looking at it right now. Come on here, take a look at it, really think about it. Think about the implications of every single one of these phrases. What's being said and what's not being said and how much it's being said. It really gives you an idea of what is being stressed. And when you have a whole collection of things that all relate to the second coming that suddenly come to life within the last few years, it might be because the second coming is really soon. It may just be because of that. I don't think it's because we're about 100 years away. I don't. Because that would just be kind of arbitrary. In the 70s, you could say, well, what about the 70s? There was a lot of things going on in the 70s, in the 80s. This was the time when Israel captured Jerusalem. Prophetically, that was important because as far as there's two parts to the times of the Gentiles. The one part is the time when the Jews would possess the city again. It would no longer be trodden underfoot by the Gentiles. So that part, that's done because they now have it. As of 1967, the 6-Day War, Israel has Jerusalem again. So that was key. Another thing is these are the years, now this is my own opinion, these are the years that the BYU Jerusalem Center and the Independence Visitor Center in Missouri were announced and constructed and dedicated, the 70s and the early 80s. And those two buildings, it's my opinion, are meant to be those temples of the second coming for New Jerusalem in Independence, Jackson County, Missouri, and in Jerusalem itself. There's a lot of excitement during this time. So a lot of prophetic things, in my point of view, were happening in the 70s. There was also a lot of cultural change and stuff like that. The Cold War was going on, but a lot of key things I think were happening. And then in recent times, well, we're just closer. I think it's pretty much that time. I think that's why we now see the oldest living prophet that the church has ever seen in this dispensation. President Nelson is the oldest living one, and there's just all these things happening. I feel like if you look at everything together broadly, take it together, put all the pieces together, the story that you get is that things are getting really serious really fast and time is running out. And President Nelson has said as much. All right, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.